So I'm just going to read what we have on our website for those of you who might not have seen it, just to sort of give you a background of who Darragh was, and I'll finish just with a few personal notes. And it's an enormous pleasure for me to say that attending the meeting today, and they only arrived, I think, on the weekend, is Darragh's youngest daughter, Alex, and her fiance, John, and their little baby, Poppy. So I'm really glad to see you guys here. And I know your sister, Andrea, would have, yeah, she's at the back there, would have also come if she hadn't been under the weather. And Darragh's widow, Liz, is watching this on Zoom. So they're really, I think the family are quite happy that we're having this meeting in his memory. So I'm just going to say what's written here, that Darragh passed away in 2015, only aged 58, and he's the same age as I was. And he was an esteemed colleague and friend to many astronomers, not just in South Africa, but all over the world, and quite a formidable reputation for his intellect, insights, and abilities, and his sharp wit and humor. But at the same time, such a kindly, friendly, supportive person. He joined the observatory in '97. I'd already been there for 5 years. We'd both been at UCT, University of Cape Town, working in Brian Warner's group. Scientifically, he made seminal contributions to the studies of white dwarfs, cataclysmic variables, hot stars and pulsating stars. He's one of the leaders of the so-called Edinburgh Cape Blue Object Survey, and was one of the co-discoverers of an entirely new class of pulsating subdwarf B stars. And this led to investigations over a period of time for about 20 years, leading to 30 papers co-authored on this subject. High-speed photometry was one of the sort of passions and critical tools that we were all using at that time, and Darragh designed and built one of the first high-speed CCD photometers, which was used at the Sutherland Observatory, the so-called UCT high-speed photometer. And this led to his involvement then in the Southern African Large Telescope instrument development, and in particular being responsible as the PI for instruments on the spectrograph, the Robert Stobie spectrograph, and Salticam, the high-speed imaging camera. His contributions to SALT were truly immense, and it started with his complete redesign of the optical system to give 4 times larger field of view and much better imaging quality. But then following the death of the director of the observatory, who was also one of the board members, South African board members, Darragh took over this job, and he took it on with a passion. He was determined that SALT would be the best telescope we could possibly make it, and worked tirelessly on that. And so when we had, in the early days of commissioning, a problem with the optical quality of the telescope, he took on the responsibility of diagnosing what the problem was and coming up with a plan to fix it. And this he did. So it was just one of the testaments to how talented someone like, well, how Darragh, the talents that Darragh had. I mean, he taught himself basically optical design and became an eminent optical designer. And this is just sort of representing, I think, his ethos. So whatever he did it with 100% of his effort. There were never any half measures. And this applied to science, technology, and many other things as well. And one of these other things is, and vividly demonstrated, is when he took on the job of defending the former director of the observatory, Phil Charles, who's in the audience here, against a completely unwarranted and trumped up charge by his superiors at the National Research Foundation, and ended up supporting Phil as his counsel in a essentially in a disciplinary dispute, and was completely exonerated. And during that time, Darragh basically taught himself labour law in South Africa and ran rings around a professional lawyer who wasn't supposed to be a lawyer, because this was a sort of thing where you didn't have official lawyers representing you. You could have a colleague, and Phil's colleague was Darragh, and the person who was bringing the charges had his colleague who happened to be a lawyer but not practicing. Nonetheless, the result of that was Phil's complete exoneration. Following all of the work that he did on the salt repair, he was given a sabbatical by the Salt Foundation to get back to some research. He was awarded the Gill Medal for exceptional services to South African astronomy in 2011. And during that time, he managed to start sort of working back into doing science again. His research over his career has included seminal works on compact binaries, including CVs, X-ray binaries, the topics of this meeting. He was a proficient observer, instrument builder, coder of data reduction and analysis software, while at the same time having a very strong theoretical understanding and ability to develop models to explain observations. So I think it's very fitting that a Magnetism and Accretion conference is memorializing Darragh. And from my personal point of view, Darragh was the first friend I ever made when I came to South Africa in 1988. He was a postdoc at UCT, as I was, and we very quickly became close friends. We got to know Darragh's family very well. I had a daughter who went to the same school as Darragh's kids. We shared many interests outside of astronomy. We had fierce competitions when we were observing at Sutherland at the pool table on cloudy nights, where he would beat not just me, but everyone else hands down, because being a photometrist, he spent more time down in the hostel on cloudy nights than a spectroscopist, which I was partially, where you can, you know, you don't mind a little bit of cloud. So, and then he also had a keen sense of humor, and also participated with me in various pranks that we undertook at the observatory, particularly 1st of April sort of things that we did, which in hindsight were very mean to the poor hostel staff. Like when we did a complete rotation of the dining room by 180 degrees, moving all of the furniture, or a reflection of the lounge room, and they came in and found everything completely moved. Anyway, I think that's enough for me. I think we should be showing the slides now, Ruby, if that's possible, the slideshow of Darragh. And I'm going to hand over now to Lisa Crause, a colleague of mine from the SAO, who also was a close friend of Darragh, worked with Darragh a lot, and has, I think, a lot of also things to share about him. Thanks, Lisa.
Hi, everyone. So I guess I could talk about Darragh for days, but we've got about 5 minutes. So I'll just give a few thoughts I've been reflecting on in the last few days. Just trying to think about what was the essence? What is it that made him so extraordinary? And I think one of the main things that came down to is the fact that he never took himself too seriously. He was always dying for the opportunity to call himself an idiot and to, you know, laugh out loud about how he got something so wrong. He cherished that. And so that really lowered the threshold for exploring new things. He was never daunted by the prospect of not knowing what was going on or being surprised by something. And you know, we could in every facet of what he did, you could see the consequences of that. And, because he didn't take himself seriously, he had time for everybody. He treated absolutely everybody with care and respect, interest, genuine interest. If Darragh was talking to you, he would just bore into you, and it could be quite unnerving, but it's just he really was totally focused on the person. And so that really was extraordinary. And I think also his humility of just, being willing to embrace, he would throw himself into things with such vigor, and, with the full expectation that he could screw up completely. And part of the incentive for that was that he would then look forward to being able to, throw himself on his sword as theatrically as possible. It just was, he took such pleasure from that sort of thing. And so his joyfulness, his playfulness, his exuberance really was infectious. And also he had the most incredible pain threshold for drudgery and tedium, things that most people would never even get close enough to bounce off of. He would just dive into, as David said. He just decided to learn optical design. So how do you do that? Well, you go and you take out every book in the library on that, and you just read it all, and you just do it. Now most people just don't do that, and so I think so much of his superpowers stem from those two things: the fact that he did not take himself too seriously. He was not afraid to fail. He was not afraid to screw up and then celebrate it because suddenly he's learned something. I think we could all take a lot from that. And then the fact that he would just take such joy in exploring new things, even if the cost was incredibly high in terms of the threshold for getting into something new. He never shied away from an enormous amount of work to get into something. And so I was extremely fortunate to run into him, at a very early and formative stage in my career. And, selfishly, I'm so grateful that SALT didn't work straight out the box. We ended up having to spend 16 months up in Sutherland together. Unfortunately, I was on the receiving end of his extraordinary pool skills that David mentioned. By the time we were doing the image quality stuff, he was just a rampant pool addict and intensely competitive, but again, always with a good spirit, never in a mean way, just as a way to push people further and further. And so, he would never sort of patronize or humor you. If you were playing terrible pool, he would try to kill you even harder just to kind of force you through it. He would never, I remember saying to him once, "Don't you dare let me win." And he said, "Oh, never." I would never do that. So, he confronted so many challenges in his life, and he just learned to do it with gusto and energy and enthusiasm. And it just made for an incredibly fun person to be around. And, we were all just, as we said at the time, we were so lucky to be so sad. We'd had this unbelievable opportunity to share the world with this person. And there was still not a week that goes by at the observatory that we don't talk about him and think about him. So I'm very glad we're finally doing this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lisa. So I'll just call on Phil to give some very brief words. Phil.
It's hard to know what to say after the beautiful intro of David's and wonderful memories of Lisa, both of whom have already referred to things that affected me greatly during my time as director of SAO. I actually knew Darragh from the early 80s when he was still a graduate student. That's when I started coming down here. But even then, I recognized a student with a razor-sharp mind who was a delight to work with and talk to, very modest, kindly, interested in what you were doing and always willing to help. You could always, there were surprises, and one of them, Lisa's referred to the pool, playing up at Sutherland, but I remember he was a squash player, and when he told me that, that was my first huge underestimate. You looked at Darragh, he's not, didn't look like your typical squash player. And I rather fancied myself here as a squash player, and I've done pretty well against the current SAO director. But I thought, oh, this is going to be easy. I was taken apart. His control of the court was staggering. I was totally wiped out. He took great delight. I enjoyed it immensely as well. We started getting interested in time domain astronomy because he worked more on CVs, me on X-ray binaries, and his development of the UCT photometer that's been mentioned made it, so put South Africa very much at the forefront of this kind of work. And Darragh and Liz, with the two girls, spent a sabbatical with me in Oxford in the mid-90s, which was extremely productive. After I'd moved to Southampton and got them to be part of SALT in the early noughties, and we sadly lost Bob Stobie, the then SAO director, Darragh twisted my arm to come forward as a potential replacement. Darragh's one of those people that you just don't find yourself saying no to, and you don't realize that this is happening. Both have referred to the support that he gave me during the extraordinary circumstances of my suspension during the time that I was director here, and I will simply add to that that Darragh, as my representative, as we sat down for the first day of the hearings, and of course, my opposition would present the case against me, and they stood up, and it opened with Darragh standing up and saying, "Objection." And it was because, as David said, they were not supposed to have a professional lawyer representing them. And although he wasn't working for NRF as a lawyer, and that's why it was supposedly okay. And the chairman simply said, "I'll allow it to continue, but I have noted this." Afterwards, long after all this finished, Darragh admitted to me that his childhood dream was to be Perry Mason. And he was achieving that in defending me against the child. Grab me during the meeting if you want some of the more gory details of this event. And there are lots of them, and there are some fun stories in there. Anyway, I'll finish by saying that this positive outcome, I think, really did have a lasting influence on how astronomy and science are organized here in South Africa, and I think it helped contribute to South Africa's success in being able to host the SKA. And so this came through Darragh's work in helping me through this. So I'll simply say, I think the spirit of Darragh will be with us throughout this meeting, and he would be proud to see all the science that is going on now that he's been associated with. I'm very proud to have had him as a great friend and colleague for so long. Thank you, David.
Thank you very much, Phil. So the last tribute we're going to have is a pre-recorded talk from Professor Chris Clemens, who is an astronomer at the University of North Carolina. Unfortunately, of course, the time zone is rather terrible for a live US presentation. So Chris pre-recorded this. I should say that Chris was a SALT board member because North Carolina were a partner in SALT at one time. But moreover, he and Darragh have worked together scientifically for many, many years. So we'll hand over now to this presentation. Thanks.
Good morning to all of you in Cape Town and to those of you from around the world attending the Magnetism and Accretion Conference. I would like to start my remarks by thanking David Buckley and the conference organizers for offering me this chance to pay a tribute to my friend Darragh O'Donoghue. Though we never lived in the same city, Darragh was actually my best friend, and the course of my life was altered by knowing him, and it was profoundly altered by his untimely death in 2015. I met Darragh in the 1980s when I was in graduate school and he was a postdoc. My advisors, Don Winget and Ed Nather, were trying to form the Whole Earth Telescope, a high-speed photometry network, with SAAO as an anchor site. They had no idea what they were doing, and neither did I. And in those pre-internet days, we had to do most of our remote planning by telephone. And with no directory, I initially reached out to Darragh by calling the Cape Town operator and asking them to ring every D. O'Donoghue in the city. After a lovely conversation with two other D. O'Donoghues who were surprised that there was a Darragh in the area, I finally got him on the line. Those of you who never met Darragh may not know that he had a distinctive stammer, which I was sometimes convinced was a ruse to disarm us, but which was at any rate one of his many endearing features. I'll say more about that in a moment. In one conversation on the phone, Darragh helped me understand what was needed at that time to ensure that we could work well with SAAO and its scientists in the network. And we became collaborators along with Don Kurtz, Brian Warner, and others. Over the years, Darragh and I would find time for lengthy conversations at conferences, and I found him to be one of the most profound and humble thinkers I have ever known, a deeply warm and caring person, and absolutely the funniest man God ever put on this green earth. I hope that the conference will be filled with stories about his antics for which he was well known, and I will have a chance to share some here in a minute. But Darragh was also a fine scientist, one of the best, and he taught me a wide variety of subjects, both in our conversation and in his publications, which he did not mind expositing upon when I met with him. He taught me subtle lessons about noise and high-speed photometry, about the respective roles of hard and adjustable apertures in photometry when CCD imaging replaced our phototubes, and his work on the pulsating ZZ SETI L19-2, which still underpins much of the seismology of DA stars, was a model for analysis. He taught me, among other things, how to calculate amplitude reduction near the Nyquist frequency. Related to this conference, he served on a PhD committee for my student Josh Fuchs, and through that interaction, I learned most of what I know about magnetic accretion. But we really started to work together on a weekly and even daily basis when our paths into instrumentation converged, and we were both on the board of the Southern African Large Telescope. My research team here in Chapel Hill built the workhorse instrument for the 4-meter SOAR telescope, the Goodman spectrograph, and Darragh and his teams were responsible for SaltyCam and the spherical aberration corrector at SALT. As with all complex telescope systems, these two telescopes and their instruments did not work out of the box. Both projects were working through the pains of commissioning during the same period, and Darragh and I consulted and commiserated regularly. And we worked together on something entirely new. Darragh became possessed with the idea that Offner spectrographs could be built with inexpensive volume phase holographic gratings. Each time I met with him, he was more persistent that I look into this, and each time I told him all the reasons why I did not know how to make such a thing, and if I did, it wouldn't work anyway. But he annoyed me so much about it that in the process of developing the way to make about 176-inch VPH gratings for the virus spectrograph at the HET, and one day in the lab, I asked a technician to take an old projector lens and see if we could coat on a curved surface. And in about 2 days, we had recorded a curved grating. A little bit later, one of these was lying around in the lab, and it happened to be sitting on a mirror. And I noticed that you could actually use it in double pass mode. And so we had at that point a spherical grating that could form the heart of an Offner spectrograph. Darragh was so excited, he said, I'm coming there. This was in February, and he said, I'm coming in June, and he came to visit for several weeks, and we began to work on how to make a spectrograph out of this technology. But Darragh took it further. He started to realize you didn't have to make an offner, and you didn't need a reflection, that in fact, a curved spherical grating and a spherical mirror would correct all 5 optical aberrations. And this is Darragh's, I would say, lasting contribution to the field of optics. So we began to develop this into a commercial product. He helped me submit 2 patents. Then we began some baseline designs, which were almost ready when Darragh passed away in 2015. I will admit that for me, the fun went out of astronomy for a while. And that's how I wound up continuing as department chair, eventually becoming dean, and about a year ago being named provost of this fine university. But I will admit that this is not much fun either. And I have been working in my spare time and spare hours to understand what Darragh had been doing in his optical designs. And I am now able to develop new designs to continue that work. And I'm working with a commercial partner, once again, to see if there are commercial possibilities. The designs are not best for astronomy. They don't have focal reduction built in. They could work in astronomy, but they're spectacular in the area of hyperspectral imaging. If Darragh were here, he would be very disappointed to see me as provost. He did not pay much respect to authority and was quite irreverent, and I would only be able to console him by letting him know that I am trying to be the most irreverent provost in America. I started out today by saying I would share some anecdotes, and I'll leave you with 2. So at some point, we had a whole Earth telescope conference at the Kaninki in Poland, and after drinking maybe a little too much one night, I was with others trying out our best voice imitations. We were imitating Jimmy Stewart, famous people, and one another. And Darragh looked at me after a few of these and he said, now, Chris, I know when I'm not here, you must have an imitation of me. Let me hear it. And so I obliged, and it wasn't a great imitation, but he thought it was wonderful and laughed and laughed. And he said, look, when you ask a question in my talk the next day, do it in my voice with the stammer, with the imitation of me. And so dutifully the next day, thinking he would find this funny, I raised my hand to ask a question, and I started out in a stammer in his own voice. And he just stood and looked at me with a blank face. And there was a hush over the auditorium, and everyone looked at me like I was the biggest jerk in the universe. And I embarrassedly finished the question and sat down. We had a great laugh about it over and over every time I would remind him that he had pulled this on me. I think one other anecdote that I would like to tell, since I'm on Zoom here, is when he was here in Chapel Hill, he was delighted to be able to attend the executive board meetings of the SALT telescope, but he told me he wanted to attend them in only his boxer shorts. So he would dress up in a suit like this, and he would sit behind a table in his boxers, and he would attend the whole meeting without ever standing up. So I would like to tell you that I'm here in Chapel Hill with only my boxers on, but I thought it might not be a good look for the provost to be arrested in our administration building. Well, I hope you enjoy the conference. I'm going to end by sending my love to Darragh's friends and family, especially Lisa Crause. Alex and Andrea, I understand you're there today. I send you my love, and also to Liz. And I wish I could be there with you, but they keep me very, very busy in my job. To the rest of you, enjoy the conference and raise a glass of Irish whiskey to Darragh's memory for me. Thank you very much.
Okay, so that concludes our tributes to Darragh, and I must thank my colleagues for these heartfelt comments.